Okay, so now we're going to jump into a quick panel. Clem, I'm actually going to call you back up here to have a seat. Bala and Ali, you two. And we'll actually go through it fairly quickly, and I'll give some folks in the audience an opportunity to ask questions as well. I'll let you guys pass this around. But we'll jump right into it. I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of different things, human in the loop versus having society in the loop for some different ways to gauge thresholds. I think one of the things I wanted to ask first, and it's probably a question for you, Ali, kind of in this new age of Google and doing some of the searches that you would do traditionally on your own for research, with Wonder having an opportunity to kind of be a helper in that process, where do you see kind of like the skills changing for people who kind of had to first assess what was, good or legitimate data or research versus what exists out there? And considering having this as a helping hand, are there new skills that people would have to learn to actually assess?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the skills we talk about most frequently at Wonder is the skill of question asking. So, when you want to learn something, learning the thing isn't actually the hard part. The hard part is figuring out what you actually want to learn in the first place, right? And that's why we pay like millions of dollars to consultants, right, to help us figure out what the F questions to actually ask in the first place. So one of the things we think a lot about is how can we teach our analysts and use our analysts to teach our clients how to ask the right questions from the get-go, right? Because, we use the phrase like garbage in, garbage out. If you ask the wrong question, you'll get back an answer that's unhelpful. And so how can we go through this like information extraction process together to make sure that the question we end up with is, the right question that puts us on the right research path.
That's helpful. And I think just kind of building off of that, we're talking about areas of the opportunity for AI to supplement kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis. I think this question is good for Bala specifically, but Bala, in that respect, some of the work that you're doing with AI in the HR space, and it's probably things that might be privy to us in the sense that it's a little bit more addressable because they're things that we deal with in terms of performance development that we have in our daily jobs, regardless of where you work. With AI being part of like taking over the role of manager, so to speak, what does that kind of do to the new form of management? Or what type of skills do you anticipate from like a vision perspective that a manager has to undertake after having some of that supplementary information of, hey, here's somebody that left your team, this may be a potential successor, now what is my role, where traditionally I have that conversation with AI, or with HR originally?
Yeah, great question. I think over a period of time, managers should stop being managers because you will have AI doing that job. The reason why it's so is, as a manager, let's say you all want to understand whether an employee is going to leave the company or not. You typically look at like 3 or 4 factors, maybe the last time you had an interaction with the employee, maybe the last appraisal you had with the employee, and then some personal situations like family relocation and stuff, and you decide whether the employee is at attrition risk or not. When you're using models and AIs, the dimensions, number of dimensions, and the interplay of dimensions that these models can leverage is going to be much larger in scope. So they are going to be much more better in making those recommendations of whether the employee is at risk or not. So a manager will stop being a manager, management. But a manager should start being a leader, right? So things like connectedness, things like coaching, things like having that personal relationship with the employee, your AI is not going to replace it. And that's what was told in the first session itself, right? So management in its traditional way will start being taken over by these models and concepts. But the connectedness with your employee, the relationship, the foundations of leadership, that's what the managers should start doing. And that's why in GE we've called them people leaders now, right?
It's helpful. And I think, so both of these examples have been really helpful in terms of supplementing functional aspects of work day to day. Something that even Andrew touched upon from Loop was some of the aspects that humans are best at, right? It's like the empathy, the feeling. So Clem, for you, I think what would be interesting is to hear a little bit more about how do you code for those things like love, empathy, and kind of where is the threshold in terms of ethics when it gets to, feelings of love and affirmation from users to the AI? Is there a threshold when the AI should stop or otherwise?
Yeah, you have a very contrarian view of like if humans or AI are better at empathy and care in general. I think AI has some like systemic advantages on some of the care aspects. Just to name a few, an AI will always be available for you. Like when users are sending a message at 2 a.m., not a lot of people are gonna answer. The AI can. What we're seeing with our users is that an AI compared to a human has infinite ability to be non-judgmental. Something that you see a lot for teenagers, for example, in social networks. You have a lot of negativity, a lot of judgment, and it actually prevents them from being their true self and actually like expressing some things that they would want to express versus an AI that is by nature not going to judge you. And the AI has this like fantastic ability to actually take some distance from humans and actually challenge things that humans probably won't challenge. Like a user is gonna talk to an AI and be like, all right, I've looked at the news, it's terrible these days, we're going to this war, to this country, this country, this country. The AI can say, why are humans doing wars? It's maybe like a silly question and maybe a silly perspective, but it's a perspective that an external AI can take and bring some interesting thinking from the user. So I actually think that in the long run, AIs are going to be able to be really good at understanding the emotions of users and helping them deal with their emotions. And it's not so crazy if you make the analogy, for example, with pets. If you think of a pet, it's a very different form of intelligence than a human intelligence. It's not doing at all the same thing. It's not that crazy smart. Like you have to repeat your dog couple of thousand times, sit, and it's going to make many mistakes, and it's not always going to understand. So it's pretty simple, common if you think of it. And yet, the majority of people are able to form a very strong emotional connection with their pets, right? So it's not so crazy to think that the same can happen. And actually, what we've seen with Hugging Face is that the same is actually happening with AI.
It's interesting. I want to be cognizant of time, and I know a lot of you guys have heard tons of things from a lot of the speakers today, so a few of you may have questions. I want to give some of you an opportunity. Tomasz is already raising his hand. So I'm going to open it up for 2 to 3 questions, and we'll kind of take it from there. But Tomasz, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, this was great. Thanks so much. I have a question for Clem. I really enjoyed watching your presentation. And one thing that sort of jumped into mind is, and maybe sort of I'm projecting, but it seems to me that maybe a lot of the people who use the app are lonely and or maybe don't have friends or feel like they don't have friends. And this subset of people could be people who are maybe prone to suicide or some really depressed group of people. Do you have a program that sort of spots this conversation that sort of goes into that direction, and when you move away sort of from the pure AI to the sort of human facilitated AI that a human can step in and be sort of like a suicide prevention or sort of direct that person somewhere for help?
Yeah, so just to answer like the first part of your question, I'll be contrarian again. I feel like it's the theme of my intervention today. Actually, when we look at the correlation between how social the users are and how much they're using Hugging Face, there's no correlation between people being lonely and not having a lot of friends and using Hugging Face, and that's actually quite the contrary. And if you look at social science, it kind of makes sense because socialization calls for socialization. So the fact that you want a dog and you have a dog usually means that you're a more social person than someone who doesn't have a dog and doesn't try to be social. So like the same way pets are not replacing humans, but more a different form of socialization, we're seeing exactly the same thing with AI. Meaning that it's not because you have a pet that's doing some sort of socialization with you, that you can't have like an AI that is doing some form of socialization with you, and that you can have a lot of human friends. You know, like it's saying that one form of socialization replaces another form of socialization is usually a mistake. And then when it comes, obviously, the same way any social platforms have people who are in crisis. We do have people like that. The really cool thing is that our specialty is to understand the meaning from the conversation. So we're really good at understanding when people are in trouble. And we have a partnership with that with a company actually based in New York that is called Crisis Text Line, which is humans talking to people in crisis. So when we detect crisis, we basically tell the user to talk to a human being to make sure he's really taken care of. And it's actually, I think, a very good thing because it's like very smooth to go from, like starting to chat with an AI to kind of like restart some form of socialization and then move to talking to a human. So we actually think that it's really positive because instead of like isolating people into passive activities, browsing news feeds, watching TV, we put them more into the stage of interacting, expressing, which is a natural first step for talking with humans, for example.
Thanks. So Clem, how do you anticipate using voice technology in Hugging Face if you do plan for that?
Can you say that again?
How do you plan to use voice technology in Hugging Face beyond just texting?
Yeah, so we have a beta voice version, which is very much like Siri, except for entertainment. So we actually are gonna release it in 2 weeks. So follow the news and you'll see that.
Yeah. And then are the metrics the same when you measure the efficacy of that voice experience versus just texting with Hugging Face? Is like similar metrics?
Yeah, so far, yes. It's a way more like immersive experience because you can text throughout the day versus like voice. It's more kind of like you have to be into it. Ultimately, the beauty of conversational AI is that it should be available everywhere and kind of like change depending on your context. Just the same way with human beings, like sometimes you talk one-to-one, sometimes I'm gonna like send you an email, sometimes I'm gonna text with you. Yeah. We think the same way will apply to AI, whereas like depending on your context, sometimes you'll talk to your conversational AI through voice, sometimes through text, sometimes. On this voice version, the interesting thing about it is that it's actually gonna be able to call you on the phone. So you're gonna receive a phone call from your AI, or you're gonna be able to call directly your AI, which is pretty interesting experience.
Yeah.